Hello everyone, welcome to our second episode of Oil Painting 101. Today we are going to talk about kind of the basics of going through an entire oil painting. We'll talk about a few different things throughout this painting, like how to mix your paints, how to kind of transfer a reference photo onto a paper. So it's going to be a little bit of a longer video and a little bit more involved, but we're going to cover a lot of stuff, so it's going to be great. You can see I've got my reference photo printed out here. I've got some apples that we're going to paint today, and I found this reference photo off of Unsplash. I will link their website in the description, but they have royalty-free reference photos. So they're a tool that I use quite often. I don't always have reference photos that I can use for painting, so I really like looking through their website and finding reference photos that I can use for my paintings. I've got my Arches oil painting paper taped down here. This is 5x7, so then this reference photo is 5x7, so we're just doing a 1-to-1 transfer here. And to get started, we are going to talk about toning our canvases. So I really like to do this on almost every oil painting that I create. You can tone your canvas with any color, literally any color, it does not matter. I just like to tone my canvas because it takes away the white paper, first of all. So it kind of gets rid of that art fear. You've already kind of put some paint on the paper, and then you're just kind of working from there. It also helps you to see your values a little bit better when you put them on the paper, because when you're working with white paper, it's hard to see the light colors that you put on there. The dark colors also look way darker because they're contrasted with that white paper. So if you tone it with any sort of color that's a mid-tone, you can see the light colors on it, and you can also see the dark colors. And so it helps you visually to identify how your colors are looking as you're painting. So I really like that as well. There's also a style thing, which we'll kind of talk about today, and we might do, where you leave a little bit of that tone kind of peeking through the oil paint. And it can give it a little bit of an energy, a little bit of a glow, and people who look at the painting may not understand that that's why, but it's a really cool kind of technique that we can use. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate that today as we go through this painting. First thing that we need to do is tone our canvas. So I'm going to use acrylic paint. You can use acrylic paint to tone your canvas, or paper. You can use oil paint. The oil paint will not dry immediately, so you will get a little bit of that tone mixed into your paint. So just keep that in mind. That is a style too that you can use. But acrylic paint dries immediately, and you can just paint right on top of it. So I like to use acrylic paint. I'm going to use kind of an orange and yellow ochre combination today. I personally like warm colors because I feel like they give the painting a bit of a glow. But again, choose whatever color you want. I also personally like to water down my acrylic paint when I'm using it to tone my canvas. Just a little bit so that it's not super thick and you don't get super prominent brush strokes as you're doing this. So I just add a little water. And then we've got this nice orange color that we can just spread around on this piece of canvas paper. So now I'm gonna let this dry. I'm gonna use a hairdryer to speed up that drying time, and then we will move on. Okay, so now that my canvas paper is toned a nice pumpkin orange, we can get started on transferring our reference photo onto our canvas. A couple quick notes about reference photos, just super quick before we get started. The two things that you should be paying attention to in reference photos, whether you're taking them yourself or you're finding them online, is the composition and the lighting. Those are the two most important things. Everything else can kind of be changed, but those two things will really help you have a successful painting. So composition first. The general rule is rule of threes. So every third-ish of the paper, there should be, not every third, but generally the interesting things in the painting should be on the thirds of the paper. So because of this reference photo, I cropped it from a bigger one, but this reference photo has this apple here on the top third intersection here. It has this apple on the bottom third intersection here, and then it's got some cool open space on this side. So the composition of the objects that we're painting kind of goes into this kind of C shape here, and then we have some negative space on this side. And it's stuff like that that makes it an interesting composition. You wouldn't want two apples just kind of dead center and then some empty space around it. You want some balance where some things are kind of to the side, other things are to the other side. You've got kind of a path for the eye to go. And these are just kind of things that you'll pick up as you look at a lot of reference photos and you look at art. If you look at most art paintings, you'll find like some interesting things on the third intersections here. And so those are just things to look for and things to kind of frame your reference photos with. The other thing is lighting. So you want to have, the thing that I look for is really strong lighting in a certain direction. You don't really want strong lighting just straight on because then you get really no shadows. So we have this strong lighting coming from the top left-ish. So we've got highlights here, and then we've got some really deep shadows on the sides of these apples. We've got some light green here, and then we've got some really dark green back here. And that kind of difference allows you to create those paintings with high contrast, and it makes for a really nice painting. And so it helps when your reference photo kind of reflects that too. So again, look for composition, look for things on the kind of intersections of the thirds, and then look for good strong lighting in a certain direction that is not straight on or straight backlit. For transferring the reference photo, the method that I use all the time is called the grid method. And so what that means is you figure out a grid that you can apply to the reference photo and also to your painting. Because the reference photo is printed out and is the same size as my painting, I'm just going to use 1 inch here and 1 inch here. But if you have a smaller reference photo and a larger painting, you may have to do a little bit of math to figure out, okay, the squares are 1 inch here, so that means they need to be 1.5 inches here because this canvas is 1.5 inches bigger than this one, 1.5 times bigger than this one, etc. So for another painting that I have, the painting is 18 by 24. So each of these squares are 1/2 inch, but on the painting, they're 1.5 inches. So it kind of scales up that way. So there's a little math involved, but for this one in particular, we can just do 1 inch because the reference photo and the painting are the same size. So I like to use a ruler, and I'll just make a little mark at each inch line here. I'm using a pen on this reference photo, and then I'll do the same thing on the top. And then I'll just use the ruler, line up those dots, and connect them. Okay, so we can see here that I have put the grid onto the reference photo, and I've also put the same grid onto my paper. So what we're going to do now is use the grid to transfer over the image to the actual canvas. So I'm just going to start with this big apple shape, and I see that it kind of intersects the grid at this spot right here. There's a little bit that comes out into this square, and then it comes back in. Comes down to a little over halfway. Comes back up this way. And it's not like super necessary for a reference photo like this because these are just apples. It's a good technique for anything that's a little bit more complicated because our brains just like to trick us and make us think that things are bigger than they actually are or smaller than they actually are. And using the grid really helps to keep everything the actual size that it is in the reference photo. So I really love using a grid. I use it for almost every painting that I do. And it's just a great tool for transferring a reference photo without just like spending forever trying to transfer it just kind of by hand. So as you can see here, I have finished my sketch. I've got a pretty good roadmap for where I want to go with this painting. So I've picked out my colors. I'm going to share them with you now so that you can kind of pick out similar ones. I've got titanium white, obviously. I'm going to be using alizarin crimson. These reds here are quite cool tones, so that means they're closer to purple. Alizarin crimson is a very cool toned red, so I'm going to use that. I'm going to use cadmium yellow hue to get some of those oranges that are closer to the highlight there. I'm going to use ultramarine blue for the sky and also mixing in with the red for the shadows. I've got 2 greens that I'm going to use for the leaves here, sap green and hooker's green. This is more of a yellow green, this is more of a blue green. We've got both of those. We've got kind of a yellow green here and more of a blue green on the tops of the leaves here, so I need both of those. And then burnt umber is the last one. And that'll be used for mixing in the shadows of both the apple and the leaves. So pretty limited palette, only 6 colors plus white, so not too many colors that we need for this painting. I've also got my brushes, so I've got this larger flat brush that I like to use for larger spaces, And I really like to use these brush strokes as well, these kind of almost square brush strokes. It gives you a little bit more of an impressionistic feel. So that's a good one for the first layers of a painting. I've got a 2 round here for smaller details, and then I've got a liner brush that I always use for my details. So those are my 3 brushes, and I've got a palette knife to help me mix paint. And my medium is going to be these Chelsea Classical Studio mediums. I'm going to use the fat one because we're only doing 1 layer. So I'm going to talk about mediums and how kind of the practical way you use them in a later video when we go over a painting that has several layers. This one we're going to do today is only going to be 1 layer. We're just going to do it all at once. And so you don't need to worry about like the order in which you use mediums. But I'm just going to use this one. It's pre-mixed. These are my favorite mediums. They smell like lavender, and they're a little bit more artist safe than some of the other ones. I'll still use the other ones, but they're just a little bit, I can relax a little bit more when I'm using these. And they smell like lavender, which is lovely. So this fat medium doesn't water down my paints very much. It keeps them a little bit more firm, but it also helps them dry faster. So the lean version of this is a little bit more liquidy, if you can see that there. And this one's just a little bit more viscous, and so I like to use this one if I'm just painting with 1 layer. So we're going to use that, and I've got my mixing palette to the side here, and we're going to talk about mixing colors first, and then we will go on to our painting. All right, so I've cleared off the bottom half of my palette. I have to continue using these colors at the top here for a different oil painting, so I can just only use the bottom half of my palette for this painting. We're going to make it work. So my philosophy for mixing colors before a painting is that I like to mix kind of the main 3 or 4 colors that I see for each major object in the painting. So I can kind of see this dark, if we're talking about the apple, I can see this really dark shadow color as one color. I can see this kind of purple, darker mid-tone as the next color. I can see this brighter red here that we have as the 3rd color, and then I have a highlight as the 4th color. So I'm going to mix up those 4 colors for the apple. Then I can adjust them as I paint to match a little bit better, or to kind of create a gradient. I can mix a couple of them together. I can also adjust them for like this little spot here that's more green. I'm not going to mix an individual color for that. I'll likely just add green to one of those colors that I'm already using to paint this section down here. But that way I kind of have a starting point and I can adjust those colors as needed. Color mixing is something that you just have to do in order to get good at. And even I will just kind of adjust colors as needed. So I'll just get started here with that dark color. Add a little white on my palette knife. So I mix together red and blue to make this kind of purple dark color. I'm going to add a little bit of yellow in there to make it more brown, add more blue, and I'm just kind of mixing and adding until, and looking back and forth at my reference photo until it looks about right. I might add just kind of all the colors. So that's kind of like right now that looks kind of like a magenta color, dark magenta. I want it to be more blue, so I'm gonna add more blue. I'm going to add more yellow. That tones down that purple. It's the complementary color. And you can kind of see the color as you spread it out on the palette there. I'll add a little white to that as well. Okay, I think that's good for now. I'm going to save that. So I just scrape it up, put it to the side, and then I start with my next color. So the next color is going to be that lighter purpley red that we see as the darker mid-tone color. So I'm adding a little bit more white to this color, yellow, blue, and I'll just kind of adjust this, keep mixing it and adjusting it until it's a color that I like. That looks pretty good to me. Darker mid-tone. Put it over there. All right, next is that lighter, more orangey mid-tone. So lots of yellow and red. That's gonna be a little too bright red, so we'll add some green to that, tone it down a bit. I want some more yellow. That's pretty good for that other mid-tone that I see kind of right there. Again, these are just kind of preliminary colors. I will adjust them as I keep working with this painting. Now we're going to get that really light orangey color. And we'll put it over here. Okay, so that's kind of my general process. I'm gonna mix up those last couple of colors. I'll put you on a time lapse so you can watch me do it. And we will meet back here when we've got all our colors mixed. All right, so now that I've got my colors mixed, I am going to start painting. Just a quick note on how much medium you need. So I'm going to just dip my brush into the fat and just add a little touch of it to my paint. You really don't need a lot. I just like to mix it up a little bit with my brush, maybe add a touch more as I mix it up. But you just need a little bit in each paint color before you start using it. So what I like to do is just go color by color. Usually I'll start with the darkest and just find those places on the reference photo that I see that color kind of occurring. And so I'm gonna start with the most obvious, which is this shadow here along this side of the apple. And I'm just gonna kind of try to replicate the shape close enough. Shape of the shadow, I should say. Close enough, it doesn't have to be perfect. We can always edit it later. But just have it kind of end up over this way. And I feel like that's about right. Okay, and then I'm gonna move on. I see that shadow shape down here at the kind of the end of the apple. So I'll fill that in. And I see, let's see, where else do I see it? Maybe a little bit of it here. That side is not quite as dark, and so I'll probably kind of adjust that color to use for the side. I can actually probably do that now. I'll just add a little bit of white, and then I can use it just right away like that. So that's what I mean by just kind of real-time adjustments. I can adjust the color as I need to, just to keep working with that same color on my brush, and I don't have to keep washing it off of my brush every time. And I'm trying to apply the paint not super thick. I'm not putting like globs of paint on there, but I do want to put like a decent amount of paint on there because we're only doing one layer of paint with this painting. I want to make sure there's enough on there that we can kind of work with it later. All right, so our next color is this dark reddish purple, and I'm just gonna start adding that again in just the spots that I see it. Not gonna worry too much about blending between colors here. They will kind of naturally blend as we touch them together, but we can worry about blending later if that's something that we want to do. You can see hopefully now, just kind of working my way around this apple, figuring out where to put these colors. So I've been working on the bottom of this apple here, just kind of adjusting the colors that I had mixed already. And I turned many of them green, honestly, to get this sort of bottom area fleshed out. I will be adding a little bit more detail as we go to this area, but I just wanted to get some colors down. Just adding this little shadow here. what you'll find as you continue working with oil paints, especially if you're doing this kind of wet on wet technique, I'll call it here, where you already have wet paint down, oil paint takes a few days to dry. So anything you put down in a painting session will not be dry by the time you're done painting. It'll take a day or two at least. So you just have to kind of be careful with where you're putting the paint, because it's hard to put wet oil paint on top of wet oil paint. And you'll have to keep in mind where you're putting paint and make sure you're putting kind of at least somewhat the right color down in that spot before you move on. So I'm just starting to add like a little bit of detail, a little bit of blending here with a brush. You can see in the reference photo, the lines and textures of the apple kind of go from the bottom up and around to the top of the apple. So I'm just trying to follow that general pattern and just adding in a little bit of texture just to get us started. I can do the same thing kind of around the outside of the apple here too, just to blend those spaces between the colors a little bit. So I'm just using a clean brush and very lightly just kind of dragging it in that pattern kind of around the apple, just to lightly blend the color areas together. And these streaks are kind of what's going to help with that texture, so I'm not going to try and blend those out too well. I'm going to kind of keep those there. They can go through the highlight a little bit. Can bring some of the light color over here. And you don't want to overdo it either. You just want to get a little bit of texture and a little bit of blending on these apples here. Okay, so if you can tell something's different here, it is. I decided I didn't really love the texture that was kind of showing up with that last layer. So after I turned off the camera, I decided to go back in with my my flat brush here, and just create these like very impressionistic brush strokes here, kind of following along the curves of the apple. And I just added a little bit more paint while I did that, but the paint is in the same spots generally as before. And I really like this better. I think it looks a little bit more lively and impressionistic, but that's up to you. So if you have a brush like this and you'd like to try that, you can. If you like how your texture is turning out so far, you can just stick with it. I just decided to do this because I think it looks cool, and I've done this a couple times before and I like it. So next we are going to continue with our color blocking, and I'm going to fill in the leaves. So I'm just going to pay attention to the general sort of color of each of the little sections of the leaves. So I might fill in this top half of the leaf with a lighter green, and then that bottom little sliver that's showing with a darker green. And I'm just going to kind of block it in with this bigger brush like I was doing with these apples. Okay, so as you can see here, things are starting to take shape. I just wanted to point out a few things before we do our last step here, which is to fill in the background. I've already started to do this, but one thing that we talked about at the beginning of this painting was allowing the tone of the canvas or the paper to come through in the final painting. And I've already started to do this. You can see very subtly, I've just left a little sliver of orange as I've started to fill in this negative space down here. And that is something that is subtle, but just kind of gives it like a little bit of a glow. And I'm going to continue to do that as I fill in the sky section. So I'm going to fill in the sky and just leave a little sliver of orange between the sky and the leaves in some places, not everywhere, but just in a few places. And that'll give us a little bit of a pop of color. But I'm very happy with how this is turning out. Alrighty friends, we are all done with this painting. I'm going to go ahead and take off the tape, which is always the best part, and just show you the final piece because the border always really brings it together. So make sure you give this a try. I hope this also helps you just get started with an oil painting. It doesn't have to be this one specifically, but hopefully you can take just some ideas or some inspiration from this painting and bring it to your own life and give oil painting a try. And like I said before, everything you need to do this painting, everything I've talked about is in the description, so you can find the links there. Make sure you sign your painting, put the date on it, and let it dry, and then in like a week or two you can varnish it once it's completely dry. And there's our final painting. I just love having the border on there. That just pulls it all together. Thank you all for joining me, and I hope you like this painting, and I will talk to you next time.